Welcome to the Agile Career Podcast, where we will take you on the journey from employed for life to employable for life. We'll give you the tips, insights, and strategies to help you build the transferable skills that you'll need. So let's get started. Please welcome your host, Günther Richter.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Agile Career Podcast. This is episode 17, and I'm so glad that you can join me for another episode. In today's show, we've got another great guest lined up. This time, Jamie Mackay is joining me, and Jamie is a careers expert. He's spent his career working with individuals, organizations, and learning institutes to try and understand what the sorts of skills that are going to be in demand and what the sorts of skills that universities should offer, and how he's going to work with people finding jobs and finding suitable roles. So without going into too much detail, we're going to leave that for the interview. We're going to take a slightly different format, and we're going to talk about Jamie's journey through his career, but also we're going to look into some of the key bits around the employment market and what people should be doing in terms of what they're thinking of studying and what they should be doing when they're thinking about new jobs and developing skills. So without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Jamie, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, good evening, Günther. Really, really good to join you this evening. This fine evening, I must say.
Yeah, no, I'm quite impressed to taking the interview outdoors. It looks nice and sunny, so technology's working. So I'm sure we'll have a smooth interview. But before we get into some of the detail, do you want to talk a little bit about your current role and kind of how you got there, that journey you followed?
Yeah, sure. So right now I am the Skills Strategy Manager at the Enterprise M3 Local Enterprise Partnership, or LEP. So my role is essentially to sort of lead on the skills agenda in our area. So we're based in Basingstoke, and our area covers most of Hampshire and the west side of Surrey, and we are essentially responsible for sort of helping to support economic growth. And my role in particular is working closely with education, training providers, with business, with local government, bringing those parties together and trying to use a common language, the common language of skills, essentially. So we're trying to get to a point where the supply of skills actually matches what employers are looking for in terms of demands as well. It's quite ambitious, but it's good fun. There's some really fascinating conversations that take place.
And that's why I thought this discussion would be so pertinent, because the podcast is all about skills and helping people develop those transferable skills that are going to make them employable for life, whether it's moving between jobs or starting their own company and that sort of thing. But I guess before we get into some of that detail, thinking about the skills you've developed and maybe going back to, how you got involved in this line of work, when you were in school and you started thinking about further education or university, where was your mind at? What were you sort of thinking about as a career?
Well, I was born in, no, let's not go that far back. So, I mean, I think I'd probably cite my integrated humanities teacher. So this is sort of GCSE level, and she suggested to me that I might be interested in looking at psychology, and just kind of based on how my conversations in class, the sort of things I was interested in, and some of the discussions we had, and so I started looking into psychology and began to get really interested in the way that people think and talk and act based on in different sort of circumstances. So I took that through to A level, then took that through to university. And at university, I decided to actually continue my degree in psychology and turn it into a PhD, which introduced me into working with schools, with young people, and looking at the development of memory, which then led into an opportunity to become a student ambassador working for the university where I was studying, University of Reading. And that led me into doing more work with schools and colleges, working with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds and helping to put them into a situation where they could make an informed decision about whether or not to go into higher education. And so that introduced me into the world of widening participation. And kind of cut a long story short, I've sort of kept that theme going through my career up to today. I've been really interested in being in a position where I can support, either directly or indirectly, support people with making decisions, informed decisions on where they would like to go. So thinking about where they are now, where they'd like to be, and the sort of path they need to take it in order to get there. So I've worked for universities, but also worked in the private sector. There's just that common thread of empowering people to make informed choices about their careers.
And it's interesting having followed that path, because when you think about psychology, and especially, having gone that far in tertiary or higher education, thinking about the typical roles, it might have been doing some kind of psychology and getting into practice and that sort of thing. And I guess, was it by chance that you sort of ended up following this path, through that student ambassador role that you talked about? Was it a conscious decision?
Yeah, a great question. I've been quite fortunate. Certainly, the early part of my career. I mean, if we think back to it when I was at school, sort of what was I, sort of 13, 14. There was a paperboy job at the local newsagent, and Mum went and got the application form and brought it back, and I completed it and did the interview and managed to get it. And then a few years later, there was an opportunity at the local supermarket, and Mum went and got the application form and brought it back. And things have just kind of landed on my plate. I've been quite fortunate, partly down to Mum and the kind of other people as well. Um, and then that's kind of continued. But interestingly, as I was coming towards the end of my PhD and beginning to look for that sort of next job, that's when I started applying for roles. I don't think I was particularly well informed about what roles I was looking for and applying for. But then when it came back to, well, I'm a student ambassador, I'm interested in this sort of work, maybe it'd be worth looking for those sorts of jobs. And one came up at Thames Valley University, and applied for that and was offered it. It was perhaps a slightly lower skills level than I was technically being trained up to, in terms of a PhD at sort of level 8. But it started me off on that journey. I mean, I was doing that role for, I think, about a year before another opportunity came up. So a progression, promotion, if you like. And I went through a couple of promotion opportunities there. And there've been other times during my career where I've tried to change direction a little bit, and actually it's been a little bit uncomfortable. And I thought, no, let's come back to what I'm good at, what I'm interested in, what I'm passionate about. And, comes back to that, supporting people to make informed choices.
And I mean, you make a great point there, talking about something that you love doing and something that you're good at doing. And we're going to touch on that a little bit later when we talk about identifying skills and those sorts of things. But I want to just draw on a few points you made there. And I really like the story you told about, your mum getting you the application form for the paperboy job. But, whether it's parents or guidance counselors or guidance teachers that we have in school, it might be mentors that we meet or, have hopefully have the opportunity to work with. It's, I guess, thinking about shaping your career and informing you and giving those choices. And I guess it's probably up to us to take control of our careers. I mean, what's your thinking on who's responsible for your career?
Yeah, you got some great questions tonight, Gunther. I was kind of preempting what you were going to say, and I was thinking, I'll go down that route. But as you were continuing to say it, I was thinking, actually, you know what? I'd like to explore that a little bit more. So I think I'll probably explore both. So first of all, I'd say, well, wouldn't it be lovely to be able to empower each of us to make our own sort of decisions? So look, here's all the data you need. Just have a read through it, interpret it as you will, and go off and you'll make the right decision. Well, that's great, but what if that data is presented in a format where it's difficult to interpret? You might interpret it in one way, completely differently to sort of somebody else. you still need somebody to guide you through that data. So we could be talking sort of labour market information here. So there could be information on different sorts of sectors and jobs and maybe skills and things. But you need somebody to help extrapolate the important information from that and make it a little bit more personalised to you. So in the careers world, we talk about the importance of IAG, information, advice, and guidance. So information is here's a leaflet, advice is here's a leaflet, and here are some of the things that you might want to look at. Guidance is, okay, here's a leaflet, let's explore that a little bit, let's see what sort of things it uncovers, let's see what chimes with you, and then we'll look and do some more research and guide you to a point where actually you're ready to sort of make that decision. It's a crude way of kind of differentiating IAG, but the G bit is the bit that takes the majority of kind of resource. That costs the most, but it's incredibly important as well. As I've got further into my career, I've perhaps been less reliant on the G. I've been able to use the information, advice, and guide myself, if you like. But certainly in the early days, I've needed other people, be it my mum, my dad, friends, careers advisors, other sort of professionals to help sort of guide me. I mean, in fact, some of my line managers, I've had some wonderful line managers who've helped inform and guide my sort of next steps, given me some amazing opportunities. But certainly over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, I think I'm confident in saying actually I have sort of guided myself based on the skills that I've sort of developed and knowing which data to look at and how to interpret that and personalize it for myself.
And I guess that comes with experience, so while at that point in time when you need to make a choice, whether it's going straight into the working world from school or whether it's going to university, that information is available. And I guess not everyone has, I suppose, not the luxury, but the opportunity to receive that advice and guidance, and that's really key. And I guess even after you've gotten that and you might have set off on your path and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to study a certain degree or a certain diploma or whatever it is, I guess, is there a point then when you get to the end of that degree and say, well, I'm done, that's me now, what happens beyond that? Because I guess you've still been in the academic world, you still don't necessarily have that real world experience. How do you then take those skills that and that knowledge you've gained through that formal qualification and then put it into practice in the real world?
Yeah, I'm going to throw in another phrase into this. So there are some young people that are at university right now, or well, maybe not right now, but that are in a lovely position where they have a great deal of social capital. And what I mean by that is they through their parents, through their friends to their parents, they are in a network of people who will help actually guide them. There will be somebody who can connect them to somebody who can give them a job, or a business that can give them a job, and they will be in that lovely position where they probably don't need to worry too much about finding a role. But there are also lots of others who are at university who are not in that position. They are perhaps the first in their family to go to higher education. So actually they're telling their parents what university is like, and that's where they really need the services of the careers and employability services in universities to help sort of guide them. Friends and family may well be able to guide them. Some may be expecting them to make their own decisions, but I, having worked in a careers team, I know that there are lots of final year students who, even coming towards the end of their exams, are still not really sure where they're going to go next. But over the last probably sort of 10 to 15 years, the careers and employability teams in universities have become increasingly important. I mean, one of the reasons for that is that one of the metrics that government is using to kind of measure universities is graduate outcomes. Where are your graduates going? What sort of jobs are they getting? How much are they earning? particularly that latter point, which really riles me. And so that students are asking for that support sort of earlier as well. We're seeing it not in the final year so much, but even sort of second year and first years in some cases, and they're looking for experience as well. They're looking for ways that courses prepare them for the world of work. They're beginning to ask questions like, well, what sort of skills is this course going to give me? How does it prepare me? Is it going to get me a job? How much am I going to earn on that job in some cases? How can I talk about this course and the skills I've developed on this course to employers in the future?
So I guess fingers crossed, everything going well until that point. You've found a career, a career direction or an academic direction that is a match to your interests, your skills, your aptitudes, and hopefully some kind of demand in the market. So you alluded to that earlier on, and you land in that job. Thinking forward, then what should listeners be thinking about in terms of continuing to develop skills and continuing to learn once you're outside of that structured learning environment?
Yeah, so there are. If you were to do a search on the wonderful internet about skills for the future, skills for 2030, there are some wonderful lists out there. Udemy, I think it is one of the sort of online course suppliers. They did some. They released an infographic last week, I think it was, with the top skills for the future and for maintaining your employment, if you like. And those are kind of interesting, and there are lots of different sources for different sorts of skills. But the skills that I keep seeing time and time again, one is skills that are going to be difficult or already difficult for artificial intelligence to replicate, for example. So we're talking sort of creativity, we're talking sort of flexibility, adaptability, critical thinking, and so these are more sort of soft skills. Even sort of conversation, communication, different forms of communication. Those are really, really important. There's a lot of talk about science, technology, engineering, and maths as being key for the future. A lot of the skills in those sorts of areas are what are called hard technical skills, which actually artificial intelligence is going to be able to replicate over time. So they're not as safe, not sustainable for the future as we might think. So I mentioned creativity right at the beginning. So those that are on creative arts courses and humanities courses in that as throw in that as well. Some liberal arts courses. There are some wonderful skills that you're developing in that. You're asking about further along as well. So right now there are people locally to me, nationally, internationally, who are being put in positions where sadly they are being made redundant, and in some cases those people might have been doing that job for the majority of their life. They might have been working for that company for the majority of their life, and they're put into a situation where for the first time in many years they're having to put a CV together, having to prepare for an interview that they haven't had an interview experience for a long time. And one thing I would say is, first thing, take stock of your skills, and don't just look at the skills that you've developed in the role that you've been doing, but actually have a look at the life that you have sort of chiseled out for yourself over the years, and think about some of the skills that you've taken on and developed there as well. Throw those together, because those are incredibly valuable. If you were to take all of the skills, just thinking about my wife, who's a primary caregiver, although she's sort of employed as well, she's developed some fantastic skills working with me and looking after the kids. And I know that some of those skills, she's actually used in her role, and I've used in my role. So, and there are some fantastic resources out there, in the UK, to help with those sorts of things. So the National Career Service, that some people might not have actually heard of, don't perhaps know it even exists, is there and operating right now to support people who are been made redundant or at threat of being made redundant, to have a look at putting those skills together, thinking about what a CV would look like, preparing for interviews and other forms of recruitment as well. It's the sort of other ways that the businesses are sort of, recruiting people for jobs. So yeah, lots of helpful tips I'm hoping there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the key one is taking stock of your skills, and often I think people struggle to kind of identify or perhaps articulate those skills. Typically when people write a CV, it's very kind of, these are the activities that I did, or perhaps these are the outcomes, these are the things I did at work. I did, like, I made my sales targets, or I achieved a customer satisfaction score of X, but they don't necessarily list out the skills that they use to do that. And I mean, are there any sort of tips, or kind of, or even what's worked for you in identifying those skills, and to try and surface those out of the detail?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of sort of storytelling, and yeah, that's often what careers advisors will sort of say in an interview situation. You're asked to present evidence for a particular skill, something that will be included in the job description, an area that they are looking for. There are certain skills that they're looking for. Can you give us an example of, or can you give us a situation where? I often like to tell stories. Sometimes it can be easy, and it's probably more sensible to use something that's happened more recently in the last role. There have been times where I've had to reference a role that perhaps I did a few sort of years ago. I mean, a classic one, I think that probably applies to all of the roles that I've had over the last few years, is project management. And I'm extremely grateful to my thesis, doing my PhD. That was one massive project, and perhaps quite lonely at times as well. So you've got independent working, but you've got communication skills, because actually, in order for me to do the research, I needed to make contact with some infant and sort of primary schools. So needed to talk to sort of head teachers, and in order to get in there, and then once I'd agreed with the teacher I could go in and do some tests with the kids, then you've got to then change that whole communication to make it suitable for the children as well. So there's communication skills. Reliability, thinking back to my days at Waitrose, had to make sure that I was there on time, ready to move about the trolleys, or sit on the sit as one of the cashiers. And it's just trying to find stories that that can actually reference the skills that they're asking for. I remember presenting to some sixth formers years ago and asking how many of them had jobs. At the time, there were a few that had sort of part-time jobs. Most didn't need them. And I would sort of ask, where do you work? What sort of things do you do? And there were a few reluctant people, something, I work in a supermarket. And I said, no, don't dismiss working in a supermarket. I did exactly that. And then I would list the skills that I actually helped to hone during that time, in a way that was just unfamiliar to them. They thought, oh yeah, I didn't really think about those sorts of skills. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because it's come up a number of times in a number of interviews on the podcast, the importance of having some form of work or work experience while you're studying. And everyone that has done that has said they're so glad they did, and it helped them develop certain skills, but it also made that transition into the working environments a little bit easier. So I'm glad you brought that up. And the other interesting thing you mentioned is developing the skill around project management. And I think that's great. That's the first time it's come up on the show. When we draw out the sorts of transferable skills, you mentioned things like critical thinking, adaptability, communication skills, reliability. But the project management one is a great one, because you might not become a project manager, but you know how to structure things, you know how to work towards the end goal. And I think that's a really great point you've made.
Yeah, I actually did the Prince 2 qualification a few years ago, and I think it only lasts for about 2 or 3 years before you have to do a refresher or something. Um, I did it. I didn't particularly enjoy it, and I've never used the method. But actually, there were, I think, 2 roles where one of the skills they were looking for was Prince 2, and because I had the qualification, I could use it. So it kind of helped me get in the interview. But then when it came to actually doing the role, we didn't use Prince 2, so it was a little bit odd. Yeah, and so I mean, yeah, you could argue I was trained to be a project manager, but I'd say actually I've learned through experience.
Yeah, I mean, interesting you mentioned Prince 2, because that sort of, I guess, method of project approach has kind of been surpassed a little by, agile things like Scrum. But I think with anything, they're frameworks. And I think the important thing to take away from that is you've got within Prince, I mean, we don't want to do a project management podcast, but, there's a number of tools and processes, and there's probably no project where you would apply all of those, but having that framework to hand and consciously thinking about the things that you might need to do, and then either dismissing them or saying, I'm going to take these on board is good. And I suppose that's the thing about frameworks, and you can draw on it when you need, and you've got some structure around whatever it is you're trying to approach. So but yeah, Prince 2 does expire. And yeah, same boat. I wouldn't renew mine either. So, but glad for having done it. When you're taking stock of your situation and your skills, you're probably going to notice some gaps, and you're going to need to close those gaps. And I guess then, you're probably not going to go back into some kind of formal learning environment. You're going to have to teach yourself, or you're going to have to continuously develop those skills, so that lifetime learning. How conscious should people be of the concept of lifetime learning?
Yeah, I have been incredibly fortunate where I have had some very supportive line managers, and I've probably been in public sector for most of my sort of working life. So professional development, appraisals, performance reviews, call it what you will. Included within that is the opportunity for some continuing professional development, and my line managers have always sort of asked, what sort of professional development would you like? In some cases, there has been budget, which has been fantastic. In other cases, there hasn't been budget. But actually, even things like just being able to go out and buy a book or some books, or go to conferences, or do networking and other things. CPD isn't just about courses and training necessarily. It can be more than that. But I think where you've got, and yeah, my managers have on the whole been very supportive and understanding that I'm not going to be doing that job forever. Where they're able to offer promotion opportunities, that they did, and that was fantastic. But they would also recognise there would be, it's kind of supporting an exit route, if you like. So if I was to ask for a course that was completely different to the job that I was doing, then that's going to be a bit difficult to justify. But actually, if there's a course or some training or a book or something that I could use that would actually benefit my day-to-day job, then they would give me the option to do that. Now, so the first thing I'd say is have a look at your the CPD opportunities that you're able to negotiate with your line manager, and maybe actually you're able to do it in your line of work. Where you're not so fortunate, that's not a possibility. Then start having a look at have a look out for some job postings, have a look at some jobs and things that are on on Indeed and LinkedIn, etc., and see what sort of skills they're asking for. I mean, in the world of sort of software development, for example, programming languages seem to change, sort of every 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I think. One of the ones that seems to be mentioned a lot at the moment is Python. So if you're in that world, be prepared to sort of develop, other sort of languages. For me, the path that I've taken, I think it's there's a little bit of research skills actually, and just keeping on top of changes in sort of government policy, changes with the way that people do things. I work in a local enterprise partnership, and there are 37 other local enterprise partnerships around England. And something I did when I first started this role is started to reach out to my equivalents, so skills leads in other local enterprise partnerships, some of whom have been doing the role certainly a lot longer than me and got a lot more experience and knowledge, and beginning to tap them up for, are there particular things that I need to think about, particular people I need to be talking to. So yeah, don't be afraid to sort of ask questions and see what's sort of out there. And when one of them leaves, hey, have a look at their job description, and you could probably get some valuable insights from that as well. If you can, again, if there's an interesting point I haven't really thought about before, but if you can actually demonstrate to your line manager that by doing this particular course, it's going to add value to you as a person, it's going to add value to you as an employee, but it's going to add value to you as part of the business, then as a manager, I'm going to find that quite difficult to turn down.
I know, and there's always I guess it's a bit of an anecdote, and when you're asking for training funding or skills development funding within an organization, and managers would often say, well, what happens if we spend a whole lot of money training this person up and they leave? And the retort to that is, well, what happens if we don't train them and they stay? So I think you describe it really well there, in terms of saying it's going to add value to you individually as a person, but also as an employee in that organization, and to the organization as well. And also, you drew out some really good tips there for how to develop some of those, or I suppose, transferable skills. You spoke about books and online courses. Those are the kind of obvious things. But the other things, conferences and networking. So you've spoken a lot about networking, and I think that's a great tip, because often people think, networking is going down to the pub for a few beers and asking for a favor, but it's so different from that. So again, that's really important. And actually, in episode 7 of the podcast, I interviewed Llewellyn Fernandez, and he talked a lot about lifetime learning and developing skills. And he'd come from a BSc background, and he'd been in IT. And what he did a lot was he did a lot of woodwork and pottery and carpentry and stuff that was totally unrelated to his core, I suppose, work and core set of skills. But then as he talked through, the pieces started falling together, and he drew out a lot of skills from that. And I guess it's the creative aspect. So when you look at that, back in the formal world of academics, things like arts degrees and humanity degrees, what should people be thinking about there? Often it's thinking around doctors, lawyers, computer scientists, mathematicians, all of those sorts of very hard type of skills. And you mentioned this when we spoke before, around a drive to many of those, and perhaps forgetting about the arts. What should people think about if they are considering a move in the humanities direction?
Yeah, it's. I think we were talking at a sort of higher education level. So there are again, there are some lucky people where they will be able to go into higher education and do something that they enjoy without really needing to worry or think about where it's going to get them. And if we were to think about some of those that to go into some of the performing arts, for example, is there then a danger that we will see the actors and actresses and the musicians and performing artists of the future all becoming or coming from a particular background because they could afford to do it, and actually washing out all of those from other backgrounds who just didn't go down that route because they just couldn't afford to or were advised not to do it. I think that would be a really sad state of affairs, and I've heard Judi Dench talk about that once or twice, Ian McKellen as well. But so again, I think it comes down to, you know, if you're interested in going into the arts, into the humanities, try and have a think about those courses, how those courses break down into different sorts of skills. Have a look at the sorts of skills that employers are looking for now, but the sorts of skills that employers are looking for in the future. And as I say, there are lots and lots of lists out there. World Economic Forum and I think OECD have got some really good lists out there. And then if you can link those two together, and if you're in a position, or if you can find a data scientist who can take those collections of skills, put in some of the skills that you've got or are interested in, and see how those translate into different sorts of jobs, and then you can with that sort of data you can then go and have a look for those jobs on job posting sites, you know, like in Indeed and Reed, and then you can see the sorts of salaries as well, and all of a sudden you've got a little bit of justification for doing those sorts of courses. Now, there's an awful lot to do there, and you're going to need to draw on different sources. But again, don't do this in isolation. Talk to some people, talk to some careers advisors, some people that like playing with data like me, and let's see what sort of lines we can draw together. There are websites out there that will give you that information in different forms. There isn't one website that I can identify that does all of that, but there will be one day. There'll be an app, I'm sure.
Good opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a market there. So yeah, somebody. I was reading a paper, I can't remember who it was, but they were sort of saying that why are we pigeonholing young people and education into subjects so young? You know, even at sort of infant school, well, even sort of nursery, we talk about literacy and numeracy, and then you gradually go into sort of primary school and you begin to start talking about English and maths and science and and then secondary school, it's, you know, it sort of opens out into more subjects. There's a year or two ago, there's a really exciting higher education institution opened up in London. It's called the London Interdisciplinary School. So if you just do a search for London Interdisciplinary School, and they are offering higher education qualifications, and that's probably as far as I go. It's you know, it's a mixture of disciplines. Some people listening to this might be familiar with the International Baccalaureate, which is essentially a mixture of sort of subjects. You come out with the qualification as the IB, but actually it's a mixture of subjects. And the London Interdisciplinary School goes along the same sort of lines. So their graduates, you know, their first graduates in 2 or 3 years' time, will come out with a qualification which has a range of different skills. I believe they will also be in a position where they will be able to, using one of your words earlier, going to articulate those skills to employers and to say, you know, for the last 3 years, these are the skills that I've been honing. A big part of that will be learning to learn, But also, I would certainly anticipate, sort of critical thinking and business and marketing and who knows, a whole variety. And I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, no, it does sound interesting. And I mean, you've mentioned quite a few things that I've not picked up on before. So I'll certainly put the extra research in, and I'll share the links and the detail as part of the show notes. But certainly for what you're saying is that the call it the university or post school kind of studies is certainly evolving and things are changing. And in the previous question, I sort of questioned the relevancy of arts and humanities courses. Is there a point where we start questioning university? So is university still relevant in this changing world?
I've got to be very careful. There are some people that I know that will be listening to this. Jamie, careful. I think it is, but I think it's ripe for some change as well. There's another book for your notes called Rise of the Robots by Martin Ford, and he talks about different sectors and how certainly post 2008, different sectors have had to respond and adjust to automation. Jobs have been lost, but jobs have also changed in different sectors. But he identifies two sectors that have actually been quite resistant, or not resilient, but resistant to change of automation, and are perhaps not as efficient as they could be. The first one is the health sector, and the second one is education, but mainly higher education. And he argues that those are two sectors that are going to need to change. Savings are going to need to be made, efficiencies are going to need to be made. In order to do that, you're going to have to embrace technology. This year, some of the universities that I've been talking to that are in our area and indeed out of area never really thought they would go down this route where learning would take place, teaching and learning would take place successfully online. Now, it hasn't been perfect, through things like, sadly, like digital poverty, there've been some students that have really struggled. But there have also been lots of students that have really embraced the use of technology. I've heard of examples of students that on campus have not really engaged in a lecture, a seminar, a teaching session, but actually put them in an online environment, put them on a Zoom call or a Teams call, and they're there asking questions, they're interacting, they're really enjoying it. There's something about that sort of environment. It's not going to be perfect for all, but yeah, so universities are now preparing for the autumn term, and it sounds like there are some universities where they are going to continue to be online for a bit, but blended learning is something that's being talked about in a lot of universities, and that's something that places like Solent University have been doing for a few years. They're actually quite good at it, and having to adjust for lockdown wasn't so much of perhaps a big adjustment to sort of make, whereas there are other universities that have had to put things in place in order to sort of do it. So I'm so yeah, going back to your question, we do need institutions or some format in order to continue that sort of teaching, learning at sort of higher skills. There are ways around it. There are alternatives. There's forms of work-based learning, more sort of professional learning in the workplace, if you like. But we've still got this hierarchy of sort of skills, the sort of level 2 at sort of GCSE, the level 3 at sort of A level and BTEC, level 4 at sort of high national certificates, and then HNDs at level 5, and then degrees at level 6, masters at level 7, and then PhDs at level 8. I don't think we need more level 8, more PhD people like me. But and do we need more graduates? Well, I think it depends. It's if we're looking at, if one of the reasons that government is wanting graduates to earn lots of money is obviously if they're earning lots of money, they're paying lots of taxes. But actually, there will be lots of graduates where, and perhaps more so now more than ever, um, graduates who are not necessarily looking for those high salaries. They're looking for a nice job, a good job, something that they enjoy, they look forward to getting up and doing. In some cases, that might earn them a really good salary. In other cases, it might not. But if they're able to enjoy it, and their university experience, the higher education experience, has helped them get there, and will continue to help them move through their sort of career profile in the future, then fantastic.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good point. I think just in terms of that job satisfaction, and I guess money is important because not many of us are independently wealthy, and I think that does tend to be a focus earlier on in your career, and I think as you change or mature, I guess your focus changes slightly, and you start thinking then more about less time at the office, less time working, more time with your family, and those sorts of things, and balancing your career with that, and then to a point where if you've done well enough, you can even start thinking about philanthropy, and yet to say that twice. And it's I think as the sort of thinking and maturity evolves, that's perhaps a kind of journey that many of us go through. So I guess in summary, university is still relevant, but it's perhaps balancing that with suitable technical skills that you can use, I guess, to complement the academics that you're picking up.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just thinking, looking back to the notes for the podcast today, and something we were going to talk about that was suggested reading. And there's one book that I think I would start with, and there's lots of books I could probably reference, but it's called The Growth Mindset, and it's by a lady called Carol Dweck. She says there are essentially, you could say people fall into one of two tribes, those with a growth mindset and those with a fixed mindset. And the fixed mindset, people in fixed mindset, there is a time where they feel they have done all the learning they need to do. They don't need to do any more learning. There is nothing more to do. You can't change me. This is me. Take me or leave me. This is how I am. Growth mindset, you are continually looking for ways to adapt, to change, to learn, to learn more about yourself, more about other people. And people often say to me, you are classic growth mindset, Jamie. And I've been confronted with some difficult situations in my life. And I would argue that actually through the growth mindset, I've been able to learn more about myself and other people, and my psychology training perhaps comes into this as well. But I think when looking at your career as well, remember that the skills and the training that you got back at school, they helped you get onto the next stage, into college, and then if you decide to go onto university and then into work. But you should be very much investing in lifelong learning. Sadly, it's not something that the government are investing in financially at the moment, but one will hope that will sort of change. So we're actually, university, higher education, further education can welcome back more people at different parts, stages of their life. In some cases, we are talking people in their sort of 40s, 50s, who thought that actually the skills and training that they had back then is going to be suitable to keep them in employment for a long time. And actually they're realizing that there is still some work to be done. That they've still got a few years left before they look to retire. They need to do some more skills. So use that growth mindset and look out for the training and skills that you need. And now is a really good time. If you're in a situation where you're furloughed, take full advantage of that time to do some courses online. There's loads and loads of stuff online. Government website has got some courses. Udemy, I think it is Udemy, is the one that I'm using for a few courses myself. The Open University have got some really good resources. There's plenty out there, and I mean, actually, just YouTube. I mean, it's awful, but sorry, going off on a bit of a tangent at the moment. But the pressure in my boiler, and our boiler went down the other day, and my wife said, "Oh, we need to get an engineer out," and I just defaulted to, "Yes, we need to get an engineer out." And I spoke to my brother, who's younger than me, and he said, "Well, if you looked on YouTube," and I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you could probably do it yourself." I was like, "Oh," so I had a look on YouTube, and there was a video how to do it, and hey, I managed to get the pressure back up in my boiler. So there you go.
I think that's a great example. And I guess, if listeners of this episode had to just go away with one takeaway, it's that lifetime learning growth mindset. I think it's absolutely key. We spoke about it in episode 11 of this podcast, and the theme of the show was around the growth mindset. And Crystal Metcalf, who was on that show, she just talked about how she tackled many challenging situations and grew her career by always being open to learn and challenging herself and progressing her learning. So I think that's absolutely key. All right, so yeah, you've mentioned some really good books. There was a couple of books, a couple of website resources. So again, I'll write those up in the show notes, and the listeners can just go and follow those links. I guess just before we wrap up, if you had to go back and have a conversation with your 18-year-old self, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, well, something I was thinking about right at the beginning of the podcast was I remember people, different guys telling me, you need to have a plan. You need to be thinking sort of 5 years, 10 years ahead. I've never been that good at making such grand plans for sort of myself. For other things, for projects and things, yeah, absolutely. But in terms of my career planning, I've never really looked too far ahead, and I've quite enjoyed discovering things, learning more about myself and other people, and seeing opportunities, and being able to respond, being a bit more responsive to those opportunities. Whereas if I was a bit more of a planner, perhaps I'd leave those opportunities alone, and I would have missed out on some fantastic opportunities. So to speak to my younger self, I think, it's going to be so cliched, but I guess just enjoy making the choices. Some of those choices will be right, some of those choices will be wrong. You'll make some mistakes, but you'll be presented with some fantastic opportunities, and you'll enjoy them. I've got a great job right now. I've got a wonderful family, and really enjoying the friends and the social network around me, and looking forward to seeing where my non-planned life takes me next.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and it is difficult when you're that age to have that grand plan and know what you're going to do step by step. And I don't think there's many of us that do take that massively planned approach. So I think that's great advice, and I really like the bit you said about being responsive to opportunities as well, because that's been something that's been pervasive through all the interviews. So many of the people on the show have talked about opportunities that have come up, and they said, I'm going to grab that opportunity, I'm going to give it a go. And, in some instances, it's shaped a 20-year career in an organization. In another instance, it's been a move to a new country. And, so it's great advice. Brilliant. Okay, finally, where can people get in touch with you if they'd like to, or where can they learn more about you?
I think probably the easiest thing to do is just give out my Twitter profile. So my Twitter profile is at _scientist, but it's spelled PSYENTIST. So scientist with a PSY at the beginning. But you can put it in the show notes, can't you, Gunther?
I will, exactly. And I do think I follow you on Twitter, because I'm struggling to write down that Twitter handle. So I'll just go to my profile and have a look. No, that's brilliant. I will share your Twitter handle or profile in the show notes, and people can tweet you.
Absolutely. Yeah. That'd be good.
All right, brilliant, Jamie. That's been fantastic. Yeah, really, thank you so much for giving up your time, especially on a Friday evening. I really do appreciate it, and I'm sure the listeners appreciate it too. It's been really great having you on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks, Gunther.
Wow, that was a really interesting interview. I'm really glad that Jamie's come on the show. Again, Jamie, thank you so much for giving up your time to join myself and the listeners. I do appreciate it, and I'm sure the listeners appreciate it too. I think the interesting thing that stood out for me there was the amount of tools and resources that are available to people that are thinking about career changes or who are out there looking for a job. And I will summarize all of the bits that Jamie spoke about in the show notes, so don't worry about taking notes. You'll just be able to follow the links from the show notes. And as usual, before I finish up the show, I'd just like to draw out some of the highlights that I've taken away from the show, and just to go through those in no particular order. The first bit that really stood out for me was what Jamie said about, his mum going to get him the application form for, I think it was the paper delivery job. And that kind of resonated with things like guidance counselors and mentors, and ideally always having those sorts of roles or those sorts of people around to help inform and give you careers guidance. And that related back to the point that Jamie made, and he broke it down into three, talking about information, advice, and guidance. And all the information's out there, but sometimes there's not advice, and certainly not as often as we'd like, I think, that sort of guidance. So that again just draws out the importance of, while you might be responsible for your career, it's really good to have others out there that can look out for you and help you on that journey. Jamie also spoke about social capital, and I guess in many ways that almost comes across in some instances as the sort of old boys club, and doing business down at the golf course. And I guess the thing for me the takeaway from that for me is that even although you might not have loads of social capital, or be part of the old boys club or the golf club or whatever it is that through networking, you can start building up this sort of social capital, I guess. And Jamie did speak about it a bit later when he talked about ongoing learning or learning for life or skills development, in terms of attending conferences and networking and the importance of that. So absolutely, that social capital is something that you can build up yourself. Again, it's something that you need to invest your time and effort in, but it certainly does have payback. Look at the amount of jobs that people get that are not actually advertised. It's word of mouth. It's having a chat, bump into someone while you're walking the dog and having a chat about work, and these sorts of things come up. So it's just really important to think about that informal aspect of it, and how you build out your network. Jamie spoke about storytelling, and again, this has come up in a few of our episodes. And yeah, I think the important thing with storytelling is it resonates with people, and people can relate and people can understand. So a really good, I think, skill to develop. Jamie also spoke about the importance of having a part-time job. He used the example of working in Waitrose and saying, don't look down on it. It's absolutely valuable. You're going to learn some really good skills, and those are skills that you can take with you when you move into a different workplace. Jamie also talked about some approaches to development at work, in terms of looking for opportunities to develop your skills at work, and I'll write those up in the show notes as well. We spoke about the arts and humanities, and the important thing that is, if this is the sort of career that you're looking at going into, doing the research and going into it with your eyes open and trying to understand what the sorts of skills that employers are looking for, and will that course or won't that course help you develop those skills. Jamie spoke about the importance of having a growth mindset. He mentioned the book by Carol Dweck, which is a really good book. I think, and we spoke about the growth mindset in episode 11, I think it was, with Crystal Metcalf. And a really important mindset to have, rather than a fixed mindset. It's going to help you continuously learn and develop your skills and reach greater goals all the time. And then I think finally, Jamie said about being responsive to opportunities. Absolutely, when those come up, grab them. Don't let opportunities slip by. And the advice to his 18-year-old self was enjoy making the choices you make, because you typically only get to make those once. So, I think some really sage advice there. And again, I just want to say thank you to Jamie. Thank you for listening. Please do reach out to me and feel free to have a chat. I love hearing from you through all the social media platforms, whether it's LinkedIn or whether it's the email address or my website. Please do get in touch. Please go to your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to the show. And please do leave some reviews. I really like all the feedback I get. It helps me shape up the show, decide which sort of guests are going to come on the show. And I just love hearing from the listeners. So with that, I think we're done for this week. So thank you very much for listening. I do appreciate your time. Until next week, take care and look after yourselves. Bye-bye.